The four major party leaders square off tonight in the English debate, the only one during this federal election campaign. Let's bring in CTV political commentator Tom Mulcair to talk about this. He's also a former leader of the New Democratic Party of Canada. Tom, good to see you.
Good to see you, Marilla.
Let's look backwards first and focus in on Quebec. Last night's debate was in Montreal. I think people sometimes forget how much they need that province to be on side if they hope to win. What were your thoughts on how the candidates did in Quebec?
I think overall, the Journal de Montréal nailed it with its front page today that it was a tie, a four-way tie. And it was a bit of a play on words because last night the Montreal Canadiens needed just a tie to make it into the playoffs, and they actually won. So they were riffing off that. Why was it a tie? Because I have to say that both Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney were holding back somewhat. For the very reason our colleague just gave in her analysis, they wanted to be able to finish that evening with no gaffes. So it's true. Mr. Poilievre held back quite a bit. He was not his usual aggressive self. He kept hammering away at one theme to the people listening, that he's still fighting Justin Trudeau. And he's talking about the 10 years that the Liberals were there and hitting that nail on the head over and over and over again. With regard to Mr. Carney, more of an introduction, although he's done a couple of things like this well-known television show called Tout le monde en parle. He did very well on that. And you're right, there was some discussion about the quality of his French, but that's been dissipated. Everyone realizes that his French is fine. And tonight, of course, he'll be more in his element. And I'm expecting one particular thing tonight. I'm expecting a much more aggressive Pierre Poilievre, because this is his real shot at the brass ring. He's got to take down Carney a peg or two if he's going to have any hopes of catching up to and eventually going past the Liberals, who are not only ahead in the polls, but they've got a much more efficient vote, and they've got more people coming to them out of the other two parties, in other words, the Greens and the NDP. And indeed, in Quebec, where I am located, the Bloc Québécois is bleeding votes over to the Liberals, something fierce. We'll see what the final result is going to be, but a new huge poll yesterday showing that the Liberals still hold a substantive lead over both the Bloc and the Conservatives. And indeed, Marilla, looks like the Conservatives might actually get ahead of the Bloc in the province. So it's dire times for Blanchet and his Bloc Québécois party. Interesting.
Okay, I want to ask about Poilievre in terms of the polling we've seen over the past month has a much bigger gap when it looks to who would be the best prime minister between Carney and Poilievre. He needs to present himself as someone who can lead the country. Clearly, Canadians aren't really seeing that. Did he fulfill any of that last night?
I don't think that was necessarily his goal on the French side, because he never attracted the type of advance that he had in the rest of Canada. Let's recall that before Donald Trump was reelected, before Mark Carney came on the scene, and it was just Poilievre and Trudeau, Poilievre was 25 points ahead on average in the rest of Canada. In Quebec, that never happened. So last night, he just wanted to show himself to be a fluently bilingual, capable, respectable and respectful guy. Now, I'm expecting the pitbull Poilievre to come out a little bit more tonight, and he's going to try to draw Carney a little bit more into that. It's his home turf. It's this type of stuff that he's really good at. Now, will Carney take that bait, or is he going to try to hover above it and keep talking, which is what his main game is? I'm here. I've handled big crises before. I used to work at the highest level of the private sector. I worked at the highest level of the UN. I've been the governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, and I know what to do. That has been the number one message, and it's the ballot question. Who can handle this crisis provoked by the American president, Donald Trump? And I think that the polling shows that most people feel, and it goes to your point, Marilla, that with regards to in whom Canadians have the most confidence as prime minister, that's definitely Carney.
Okay, let's talk about one of the key issues, which is energy, right? Many have been questioning whether Carney is the right choice to support conventional energy development across the country, given his backstory, which goes more towards green and greener energy. Yeah. Do you think he clarified or said enough about that last night, and do you expect that to be repeated tonight?
I think he was very clear on that, probably so clear that some people who care a lot about the environment might have thought that he went too far, because in response to a very specific question, do you want more oil production in Canada? His answer was yes, we need that. We have to counter what's happening with the Americans, and we've got to export more oil with more new pipelines. And obviously, people from the West will say, well, we've already got Trans Mountain, but there's a strong play as well to try to get something from west to east. That was always being blocked by Quebec. And Legault now is talking a completely different game, saying that no, he's more open to having the idea of a new pipeline right across Quebec. So I think that Carney, if he does make it in, would have a bit of a sweet spot in terms of infrastructure. Although there's nobody pushing, by the way, there used to be a proponent that at the time was TransCanada, and it's just not being pushed right now. These are really expensive projects, and nobody seems to be pushing that one right now.
Okay, let's talk about Mr. Blanchet for a moment and Mr. Singh, because the gap has been so big between the top two and the bottom two that we're not talking about them all that much. But I want to know why you think Blanchet is losing that support in Quebec.
Because Quebecers are feeling the same way. I mean, I will give you a focus group of two sisters, my age group, who came up. I was having lunch with my wife and one of our sons today, and they just came up and started chatting and very openly said, we've always voted Bloc, but this time we're not. We can't do it. And I asked them a little bit why, and they said, because there's something far more important than Quebec's independence being discussed right now. It's the whole country, and we all have to get it. We all have to be rowing in the same direction. We all have to do this together. So that was, for me, a revelation. It is an unexpected side effect of Donald Trump, that it's bringing Canadians together more. They both talked about the current work being done, and one of them said, look, and very thoughtful people, well, I didn't know that we had so many interprovincial barriers, and one of the, the ironies is that Trump is going to help us make our country tighter, better knit together with fewer boundaries between provinces. So I thought that was really interesting. So they're both going to vote other than Bloc. One of them was clearly leaning towards Carney. The other one hadn't quite made up their mind between Carney and Poilievre, because they looked at everything. They had clearly seen the debate. They were on about the discussion about Gaza and genocide and the like. So these were people who clearly follow politics, had always voted Bloc Québécois, and the Bloc's not getting their votes. So in the country, because I do live in the countryside here in Quebec, this has always been Bloc territory. Where I am right now, the new riding, it's called Pays d'en Haut. It's going to go Liberal in all likelihood. There are other ridings in north and south of Montreal, within an hour's drive of Montreal, that are going to be tumbling Liberal. So it's a huge change, one that we haven't seen in decades, and it portends perhaps a very large victory for the Liberals.
Okay, so let's zero in on English tonight. You mentioned Mr. Poilievre. You expect to see more of that pit bull. Is that, do you think, what he needs to do to pick up that rhetoric and perhaps land a shot where nobody really did yesterday? And what does Mr. Carney need to do tonight to try and keep the support he has and maybe gain some more?
Mr. Poilievre has the ability. He's a very strong debater. We've seen that time and again in question period. He's very good at it. The thing is, he has to try to show a statesman-like side of him at the same time. And it's a very, very delicate balancing act that he's going to go through. But I am, yes, indeed, expecting him to invite Carney into a dogfight. And pit bulls tend to win dogfights. Carney would be wise to be very prudent as he approaches this, to stay on the same high road that involves his deep thinking on these issues, his ability to express them in terms that the average Canadian can understand. And if Mr. Poilievre gets too hot, then that might actually in and of itself work out in Mr. Carney's favor. He can't back down. He can't be a wallflower. He can't look like a pushover, because he's the person that people are expecting to be able to face Trump. But he's also got to avoid the trap of getting into a dogfight with Poilievre.
Got it. Tom Mulcair, good to have you. Thanks for joining us on the program today.
Good to be with you, Marella. All the best.